The unfailing fountain. St. Francis de Sales on divine optimism. My dear friends, we live in a time when reasons for despair seem endless. Wars, disasters, corruption, unemployment, and growing anxiety. Many ask, can we still afford to rejoice? Is optimism not just a pleasant illusion? St. Francis de Sales, the gentle bishop of Geneva, lived in a time of violence and division. Yet he radiated serenity and joy. His optimism was not denial of suffering, but trust in God's unchanging goodness. For him, optimism was faith in action, a calm confidence that God's love always has the last word. Today, we too can draw from this unfailing fountain of divine optimism. The first point for reflection today, the cornerstone, God is infinite goodness. For St. Francis de Sales, optimism begins with who God is, goodness itself. First of all, a God of love, not of fear. As a young man, Francis was tormented by fear of damnation. The thought of being rejected by God crushed his spirit. But one day, kneeling before a statue of Our Lady, he prayed, "Whatever happens, Lord, I will love you always." At that moment, peace filled his soul. He realized that God is not a harsh judge, choosing some for heaven and others for hell. God's will, he discovered, is to save all. He heard deep within, I am not he who condemns. My name is Jesus. From then on, Francis proclaimed God's mercy as the heart of the gospel. He preferred to speak not of fear, but of confidence and love. God, he taught, delights in saving, not in punishing. Secondly, a superabundance of grace. Because God is infinite goodness, his grace is never scarce. St. Francis assures us that God gives grace full and plentiful, sufficient and abundant to all. The redemption Christ won for us, he said, is superabundant, overflowing with mercy. Those who are lost are not rejected by God. They have simply turned away from his grace. Even the greatest sinner, he reminds us, is still pursued by divine love. God never tires of waiting. That is the foundation of Christian optimism. God never gives up on anyone. The second point for reflection today, the humanist heart, man made for goodness. Salesian optimism also springs from a hopeful vision of humanity. First, the perfection of creation. St. Francis de Sales saw human beings as the perfection of the universe, created in God's image and fundamentally good. He rejected the gloomy belief that human nature was totally corrupted. He affirmed that deep within every heart lies a natural inclination to love God above all things. Sin may obscure it, but it cannot erase it. We are not broken beyond repair. We are beloved and redeemable. That conviction gave Francis de Sales his cheerful realism. He believed in the hidden goodness within every person. Secondly, a Christian humanism. Because of this faith in human dignity, St. Francis de Sales could affirm all that is truly human: reason, friendship, work, beauty, even humor. He saw grace not as an enemy of nature, but as its fulfillment. To be a good Christian, he said, one must first be a good human being. This balance, joyful humanity touched by divine grace, is the hallmark of his spirituality. The third point for reflection today, the path to joy, devout life for all. First of all, holiness in every state of life. One of St. Francis de Sales' most revolutionary teachings was that holiness is not reserved for priests or nuns, it is for everyone. In the introduction to devout life, he declared, "It is an error, nay, a heresy, to banish devotion from the army, the workshop, the court, or the home. True holiness," he said, "adapts itself to each person's life and duties. Whether soldier, mother, merchant, or student, all can live devoutly." His practical advice was simple and unforgettable. Be who you are and be that perfectly. Secondly, love is the measure. For Francis de Sales, the true measure of life is not success but love. Some fast or pray yet harbor bitterness. Others give alms but refuse to forgive. These, he said, are false devotions. True holiness means doing ordinary duties with extraordinary love. We must measure our progress, he wrote, not by the number of our works, but by the love with which we perform them. The fourth point for reflection today, the fruit of optimism: confidence, gentleness, and peace. First, confidence and abandonment. The summit of Salesian spirituality is trustful surrender, what he called holy indifference. It means placing everything, joys and sorrows, success and failure, into God's hands, convinced that he can turn all things to good. When temptations come, Francis counsels, run to God as a little child runs to its mother. Do not argue with temptation. Turn your heart to God. Confidence, not fear, gives the soul peace and strength. Secondly, gentleness and humility. Salesian gentleness begins with how we treat ourselves. Francis warns against harsh self-criticism. Why, he asks, should we be surprised to find weakness weak? When we fall, we must rise calmly and gently, without bitterness. This humility opens the heart to be gentle with others. Gentleness, he says, is the flower of charity. It is strength under control, the calmness that flows from trust in God. Thirdly, joy and peace. St. Francis considered sadness one of the soul's greatest enemies because it drains our energy for good. Joy, on the other hand, is a fruit of love and a Christian duty. If a saint were sad, he said with a smile, that would be a sad saint. True joy comes from loving God in everything and seeing his presence everywhere. When our hearts are fixed on heaven, even earthly troubles become bearable. This joy gives birth to peace, a serenity that nothing can destroy. To conclude, living Salesian optimism today. St. Francis de Sales invites us to see the world through the eyes of faith, to trust that goodness is stronger than evil and that grace is greater than sin. Yes, we see confusion, decline, and fatigue in our times. Yet, amid all this, there are unmistakable signs of hope. People thirsting for prayer, families rediscovering faith, and young hearts longing for holiness. Our optimism is not blind to pain. It is anchored in the certainty of God's love. As St. Paul wrote, a verse cherished by St. Francis de Sales, "Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation or distress or persecution? No, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us." This is the unfailing fountain of divine optimism. Confidence that gives peace, joy, and courage to live each day with love. Let us drink from it daily and let our lives proclaim God is good all the time. Live Jesus.